Hey guys, it's Mathel here once again, and that was the summarized, too long didn't watch version of the 2.6 patch notes that just came out, which are a bit of a doozy. There are quite a lot of changes and things to go through with these patches. Probably about half of it is just unique items being updated, so that's, something you can more or less skip over because a lot of them haven't really changed too much and almost entirely won't impact you or your gameplay. But I did go over these on stream today, and it took about 4 hours to go through each and every single item and patch note. But for this video, I'm going to try and summarize the most important changes or things that I saw that I think might impact you and just give my take on it. So strap yourselves in, we're going in. To start with, we have the Legacy Challenge League summarized here. As we already know, it's a combination of all the previous leagues. You can have league stones, you'll be able to pick and choose which leagues you want to play, any 3 at a time, and they'll have different mods, and yeah, lots of good stuff happening there. There'll be legacy items, and the Challenge League, or the challenges that you can complete. After 12 challenges, you get legacy footprints. After 24, you get the weapon effect. After 36, you get the portal effect. Now, they all look fairly nice, and I think that's okay, though we do already have quite a lot of portals to have collected at this point, so that's a bit shitty, I think. Otherwise, yeah, no, they're fine, and the challenges look pretty challenging. There's quite a lot that will set some people back. Of course, they've also announced the solo self-found mode. Now, that's not going to affect me for the most part. I just cannot be bothered playing something like solo self-found most of the time. I may try it a little bit here or there, but it's something you can enable for yourself, play it, and then opt out of it at any moment and stop being solo self-found. When we get to the real stuff, though, that is major features and content. And to start with, Lionized Watch now has stairs. That's apparently pretty major, so the connection between the portal and the waypoint is now pretty damn smooth. So that's nice. There's 12 new threshold jewels, 12 new uniques. We've already looked at a few of the threshold jewels, and they seem pretty damn good. Less threshold jewels and more just straight up buffs to certain skills and jewels you must have in builds. So, they're good. Maybe we'll use them, maybe we won't. Maybe we won't like the skills. Who knows? Added new strongbox, 5 new exiles, 4 new cards, 25 new grandmasters in the grandmaster map. A pretty big one is Siosa now sells all quest gems once you've completed his quest, and the quests required to unlock the appropriate tiers of gem rewards. Now, Siosa is the guy in the library in Act 3, so once you finish his quest, you'll then have access to all previous gems, and I think it means for all classes, so you can then get all the gems you possibly need from the current class you're playing, which is a really nice thing, a really nice buff and quality of life change, except for, I think, the usual gems that you can only find, like Empower, Enhance, Enlighten, Added Chaos Damage, things like that. I imagine he still won't sell those. And then the purchase items screen now will be able to highlight stuff by keywords, so you'll be able to find the gems you want a lot easier, which is going to be a very nice change. Likewise, with the passive skill tree, you can now search by keywords. So you'll be able to look through your passive skill tree and find the exact things you're looking for in-game with the keyword search. That's really nice buff, really nice change, because usually I'd have to do it in my offline skill tree if I'm looking for certain things. That's really just great. Aside from that, Friends and Guild, that's been slightly upgraded for, quality of life there as well. And then improved game performance, load time, memory usage. As far as minor things go, there's nothing that really we have to worry too much about. You can read over it, but it's not a big deal. For general balance changes, unset rings can now roll a new mod that increases the level of socketed gem by up to 3 levels. Now, if that just means you can still roll a regular unset ring, so it's like a regular ring with all your life rolls and resist and all that, as well as a +3 level mod on those rings, that could make unsets a really interesting choice for quite a lot of builds, because a +3 on a Wrath and Anger, a Grace, for example, things like that is a pretty big deal, and yeah, maybe some of the new best in slot rings going around. So that's a pretty good change. Nihilist items, so +1 socketed chaos gems, can now be on level 4 items and above instead of level 40. So that means you can use your blights, your contagions, your essence drains with a +1 chaos a lot earlier. And there's also now a +2 to chaos mod going around. So you can now make +3 chaos gem staves, which means staves may be a pretty good contender for, you know, some of your essence drain builds these days. Diviner Strongboxes got taken out of everything except for maps, which is a bit of a shitty nerf. I enjoyed seeing Strongboxes outside of maps while you're leveling, and we're guessing that's to prevent some sort of botting that goes on with Diviner Strongboxes. Who knows? It's a shit change. Oh well. The Brine Rot mod, found from Brine Rot Warbands, now grants damage % during Flask effect instead of rarity during Flask effect. So if you didn't know, the Warband monsters you can kill in certain maps as bosses, they have a chance to drop a blue item, or, you know, yeah, a blue item with an additional mod that you can then craft off of. And previously it had a, I guess, pretty lackluster rarity during Flask effect mod. Now we'll have a damage during Flask effect mod, which is pretty good. But these warband items, I personally have almost never seen them myself, ever. Like, they're really rare to drop, and then trying to craft off of them, it's pretty damn hard as well. So it's a pretty unimpactful change. Spectral Wolves, summoned by Rigvold's Crest and the Scourge, now have 80% more life, which it's pretty nice change. They are useful on Scourge builds. They can tank for you. They can, you know, take some or soak some damage. So they're not a bad change right there. Allies Cannot Die mod no longer appears on eye hatcheries or Rakangos, so they're the stationary monsters, and that's a pretty nice change, just quality of life. Doesn't really matter there. Reduced monster spectral throw damage. Since it can hit twice when turning. Monster Spectral Throw was a pretty big issue, I'd say. It was one of the most hard-hitting, most damaging abilities that monsters had, so a reduction on that is a pretty good thing, I think. We reduced the size of Parandus packs for performance and balance, which is okay, I suppose, but it will probably make Parandus as a mod a little less impactful than it currently is. So that's, you know, neither here nor there, I think. And a bunch of monsters had their stuff renamed, I assume for purposes of 3.0, you know, they might be bosses in the future, or something to do with invasion. Up next, we have the skill balance changes. Now, first of all, Ice Crash has damage increased by 13% at level 1, and better damage as the gem progresses, apparently. Second stage now deals 10% less damage, down from 15. Third stage now deals 20% less, down from 30. An overall buff to Ice Crash seems pretty good, especially with a little bit of a nerf to Earthquake coming. I guess that means it's probably going to be fairly competitive with Earthquake. Of course, you won't be able to use it for any bleed poisoning like Earthquake currently does, but with the new conversion stuff coming and some good WED nodes, Ice Crash may actually see its way into quite a lot of other people's builds, and I quite likely will try at least a build with it. So something, you know, potentially to think about there. Sunder has had its primary damage increased by 40% at level 1, and slightly improved damage progression as gem levels. Secondary Shockwave effect now deal 40% of base damage, down from 70. So 40% increase at level 1 is pretty damn huge. It was already a very nice leveling gem for two-handers. As soon as you could pick it up at level 12, it's now going to be pretty insane. So I do think it's going to be your go-to for any axe or mace sort of stuff. Should definitely be what you use to level with as a two-hand character, and that's a pretty big deal. So rejoice with that one. Blade Flurry had its damage reduced by 18% at level 1, scaling to a 15% reduction at level 20. So 15% at your maximum reduced on Blade Flurry. It's a, you know, sizable nerf, but I don't think it's anywhere near big enough to kill Blade Flurry. Mechanically, it's still just a very good gem, and especially for single target, it's still very strong and very good. I don't think this will be the death of Blade Flurry at all, so I wouldn't panic too much about that one. It might be a bit worse on the more hipster Blade Flurry builds though, and especially on daggers, which also received a small nerf. But definitely still usable, I think. Magma Orb explosion rate is increased by 28%. I don't particularly like it that much, but that's a good change. Animate weapon skill now has a maximum of 50 animated weapons that can be active at once. Cool. Wild Strike now converts 100% of the attacks physical damage to a random element up from 60%. So now you're doing pure elemental damage as Wild Strike. So I think that means it's going to be easier to scale, I think, for pure elemental purposes. And it should be something you could very much look into as a real skill, especially with some of the Ranger passive tree changes. Flame Surge, I don't know, less mana cost, don't really care. I don't think that was an issue. Orbis Storms reduced from 10 seconds down to 6 seconds, don't think that matters. Zombies, I don't look into that. Vigilant Strike, not too important. Vile Haste reduced across the board just by a bit, not very important, but from 6 seconds down to 4 seconds for duration. So that does mean it's going to be a bit harder to sustain while you're mapping. Overall, it still should be a very good boss helping sort of killer thing. So Vile Haste, I think, is still fine. Shouldn't really be too worried about this nerf either. Vile Discipline changed so it doesn't provide any bonus energy shield, though I think it still should be a fairly nice defensive boost for the energy shield builds. I wouldn't worry too much about that. It just means you don't really enter God mode anymore like you previously did. You instead just get a bit more defensive while it's up. Only one instance of Blade Vortex active at once, so that's to fix some unintended damage stacking. Shouldn't affect most of us. And then Shock Nova and Ice Nova got buffed by a pretty substantial amount. Not sure they're going to be too usable still. I'm fairly sure Vortex is still way better than Ice Nova, even with this buff. And Shock Nova could be usable actually, at least for AoE. It's always had decent AoE, it's just been a bad single target skill, so that's why I use things like Ball Lightning or Storm Call instead all the time. But we might play around with this because I'm a fan of Shock Nova. It's just not fun having to swap between skills. That's a pretty large buff overall, so maybe it's good enough. And then Ice Shot went up to 60% conversion, so did Frostblades. So now you can convert 100% of your Fizz into cold damage for these two skills. So that's pretty nifty stuff. Now, as far as the passive tree balance changes that have gone on, I will opt into showing you them visually. I think I have a pretty good idea of what everything is on the tree that's been changed at this point, so I'll go ahead and go through all of it for you. First of all, this leech cluster here at the duelist end has now got a connection from the bottom, and they swapped the mana hybrid leech node from here to here, so that's just going to change up a few pathing issues, not too big a deal. Over here, the sword nodes got minorly improved, not very big or that substantial anyway, so yeah, just a slight improvement there. That's roughly it for the duelist tree. Over to the ranger side of things, this here now has a connection, so that makes getting these life nodes pretty worthwhile on most builds in this sort of area. Celerity over here now has an additional 5% attack and cast speed, so that makes it pretty nice for things like a Dream Feather build, I would think. The old elemental damage cluster that was here is now over here instead, Forces of Nature. And also this Flash Freeze cluster, which none of us really ever took, now has 2 additional nodes that do 20% of physical damage converted to cold damage. So 2 of them, which means now you can have 100% conversion with those 2 skills that I just mentioned. So that's pretty nice and very relevant to lots of new builds, I think. And then there's been added this entire elemental cluster over here. Lots of weapon elemental damage and ultimately some reflected reduction here and some penetration and even more damage with elemental weapons. So that's a really nice cluster over here, and also you can get up to 10% freeze and shock and ignite chance with these 2 nodes. That's a pretty big cluster. Now, the previous sword crit cluster that was over here has now been merged with this current sword wheel, mostly over here, so it's now Fatal Blade over here, which is a very nice cluster now, and this one got sort of merged into itself to become just a stronger overall wheel. So this entire sword wheel, pretty damn nice as well at this stage. A lot of the stuff over here got sort of shifted and rearranged, and some of them condensed, so the claw passives completely condensed here, and they're pretty good now. The dagger nodes condensed over here, they're also pretty damn good and worth taking. The fizz damage nodes that were over here have got condensed into 3, and they also have some 10 reduction from reflected damage taken, so that becomes pretty good. Revenge of the Hunted, slightly buffed and also moved a bit, so that becomes pretty relevant and easier to get life on this side of the tree now. And also this aspect of the eagle now has 20% increased bow damage rather than physical damage with bows. So that will apply to your elemental and your chaos as well. So that makes it a very good 2-point for most bow builds that are going to be grabbing ranger shit, which is most builds with bows. Shadow Leech over here is now general attack damage rather than simply physical. And likewise the Mana Leech here is attack damage instead of physical. And on top of that, the claw clusters over here got vastly improved, so that they now have some pretty damn good crit and crit multi. Soul Raker is completely insane because it has 1.2% attack damage leached as life, as well as leached as mana for 0.8%, and then 50% increased life leech per second. So Soul Raker is pretty damn good now. And then we have some nice increased duration for Frenzy and Power Charges. And endurance charges there, which is a nice node. And Claws of the Magpie got slightly buffed to be a bit better, and then you have slightly better attack speed and fizz nodes there too. So that's pretty good stuff as well. As well as that, the claw nodes here got slightly buffed, so they're a lot better, and the dagger node here got slightly condensed. So overall, claws seem to be a pretty decent option these days, and something you should definitely look into when making builds with weapons. Lightning damage. This arcing blows, which was over here, and crackling speed, or whatever it was over here, they've been condensed a bit and just slightly more convenient to take, something you might definitely want to do in the future for lightning builds. Most importantly on this side of the tree that I could think of is Mind Over Matter. Just got swapped from over here to here, and now has a shitload of mana behind it. So that makes Mind Over Matter builds fairly tempting as far as a defense mechanic goes, and something you should definitely look into when going for added defense. There's 64% mana here and 100 additional to max mana. That's fairly huge. Now there's been some minion nodes over here, condensed and conjoined. I don't really know much about them, so you know, whatever. Explosive impact over here got slightly changed, so there's now 3 points to get to the area. And also there's now a damage and cast speed node here too, which isn't too substantial of a change. Prism Weave gained a bit of a buff on elemental damage to wands. Still kind of a weak node overall, considering you might not be traveling past here and they're mostly just 8s and then a 30. So it's possible you take it, but still not that strong. And then we have over here, the staff nodes got buffed, so they now do 30% increased crit, global crit, and 60 global crit with 30 global crit multi. That becomes pretty good, and then another 30 crit there. So that got slightly buffed and just becomes better to take. It's also something interesting you may note for a Lionized Jewel, makes it better for the bow characters. Likewise for the Lionized Jewel over here, you can put it there, and then you can take these claw nodes. So bow builds will quite often, I think, be taking these 3 points and then claw nodes, because that is a really nice gain to your bow build, these nodes, as well as Soul Raker. Lastly, all I could really think of at this point is these sword nodes over here got condensed and made better. So Razor's Edge is pretty damn insane, and Blade Master also pretty damn insane. Just a lot more damage, attack speed, and accuracy. Last thing I can think of is Ash, Frost, and Storm gained 10% reduced reflected elemental damage taken. I don't think it's going to be too substantial on most builds, but there will be certainly builds out there that are really struggling with elemental reflect, and this is just an additional way that you can help prevent some of that damage to yourself. There were a couple of other little changes I missed or left out, but they weren't that important to me, at least not to remember anyway. Not for the stuff I usually do. There's been a few map mod changes, so the less armor mod at low, mid, and high tier maps got a bit of a nerf because it was, pretty powerful, I guess. The curse reduction, your weaker curses on monsters got kind of reduced as well at the different map tiers. And then as well as that, the flask charges, reduced amount of flask charges you gain when you kill things, got buffed. So that's kind of their way of tackling, the fact that flasks are really good and all of us use them and love them. So on the highest tier of maps, you have 50% reduced flask charges gained, which you know, with enough clear speed isn't that substantial, but it definitely can be a pain in the ass. So that's something that's, you know, a bit annoying. Then we have threshold dual balance changes. So first and foremost, we've already mentioned, they no longer require you to grab the allocated the stats in the circle of the threshold jewel. You now just need that amount of stats in the circle. You don't have to actually take those nodes, and it's down from 50 to 40, so you'll be able to fit these jewels pretty much wherever the fuck you want at this stage, just, you know, not on opposite sides of trees to what they're supposed to be. Steel Spirit, the Spectral Throw Jewel, went up a bit, but I don't think it's very good still anyway, personally. Rapid Expansion, the Ground Slam Jewel, got buffed. I think that becomes pretty damn good, so if you're going to use Ground Slam, you definitely want one of these. The Viper Strike Jewel got buffed. That's probably something you definitely want to use. Don't care about that. Don't care about that. Don't care about that. Don't care about that. Volley Fire is now only limited to 3, which is somewhat substantial, but usually you wouldn't use really more than 3 volley fires for your barrage anyway. Maybe you'd go for 4 or 5, but they are easier to socket in now because of the attributes not being required. So that makes volley fires a lot easier to use, but you can't, you know, go overboard with them anymore. And let's see. The Cold Snap one is somewhat interesting. You can have 2 Cold Snap jewels for 50% chance on each, a total of 100% chance to grant a power charge on kill, which means your Cold Snap can be pretty self-sustaining, and that's a nice change for the Cold Snap guys, but I don't know if it's going to make it very usable anyway. Next up is the weapon balance changes. So all one-handed weapons have had their base damage increased, which is pretty damn nice. Lower level weapons, weapons with lower critical chance, and weapons with lower value implicits have had their damage increased by a higher value. So that's good stuff across the board for one-hand stuff. Local added physical damage modifiers to one-hand weapons have had their values increased by 10%. So that means the flaring mods, the flat sort of damage, gets a bit better, and it can be updated with a Divine Orb. So that's very nice stuff as well. Means you can get a higher potential, you know, highest Fizz DPS dagger in the game now, things like that. Weapon critical strike chance has been adjusted, so most critical strike values have been reduced on base types that could have had over 6.5 base crit. So that's more or less only really affecting daggers and a few other little things, bits and pieces there. It would have been nice to bring up the 5 crit weapons to a bit more crit, as you know, to make them crit options rather than nerfing the crit of the highest crit stuff. But you know, that's fine too. It's still pretty easy to get the crit that you desire, especially with diamond flasks. So it's all good. Two-hand weapons are now a little bit faster and hit a little bit harder. That's just so they can have their own flavor of being the fastest shit in the game for two-hand sort of stuff. And that's fine, nothing really too game-breaking there. Many one-hand weapons, many one-handed and two-handed swords now have flat accuracy instead of percent. So instead of the 18 or so percent that a Dream Feather would have on it, it now has 400 accuracy, some shit like that, which is a huge buff to a lot of those weapons and weapon types. Good stuff across the board there. Dagger implicits got reduced by a pretty marginal amount, doesn't really matter too much. Claws now have life gain on hit at the lower levels instead of life leech, because life leech sucks at the lower levels. So 8 life on hit on Cat's Paws, Time Worn Claw is 19, and Fright Claw is 20. And then Maraketh Claws now have more life gain on hit than they do mana on hit. So that's really good stuff for these sorts of claws. A Gemini Claw, for example, now has 38 life gain on hit, and I think it's 14 mana gain on hit. So that's a pretty damn nice buff for there too. Maraketh swords now have 15 and 20% bleed, respectively. Pretty good buff there too. And the swords that currently have a lot of crit multi got slightly nerfed from 50 and 30 to 35 and 25. Shouldn't be a big deal, that hardly matters at all. Maces, who cares, stun, whatever. And staves, a bit of extra block, not a huge deal there either. And then two-handed axes, the Maraketh weapons now have 50% increased local crit across the board instead of having shittier crit. You know, they're still kind of tough to use. There's no axe crit nodes in the game, which is basically why you can't really justify them most of the time. But there's certainly an option if you can roll a really nice one. Up next, there's a pretty big category on the area of effect balance changes. So they're removing the whole concept of increased radius of area skills and replacing it with increased area of effect, and then changing a lot of things to just have base radius units and scale appropriately as they level. So long story short, they're trying to make it worse for you to scale as much area as humanly possible. Because previously, just you keep stacking it more and more and it gets better and better, and you have, skills hitting the entire screen. The idea now is that you still have a decent amount of area, and if you put a few points in, it's a bit better, but if you put a lot of points in and a lot of investment into it, it doesn't become so substantially better that you completely ignore everything else and just go for area. So it's fine for the most part. I don't think anyone should be really too panicking about it. Especially if you don't go out of your way for all the area in the world, which you shouldn't. And, we're pretty used to a lot of area currently on our skills. I mean, this is what my Stormcall looks like on my regular Stormcall character, who essentially grabbed these area nodes, and has the area gem. So that's pretty much it. As well as Pendulum of Destruction, going up every 4 seconds, and then Dying Sun whenever I want to press it. That's my area right there. I mean, that is pretty goddamn colossal. That's without Pendulum. Wait for it. We're going to get Pendulum back. There's Pendulum, and here's Dying Sun as well. That's how ridiculous our area currently is. So, we're a bit spoiled in that. So, you'll still be able to clear things really well. Just, it won't be as infinitely huge as it currently is. And I think that's fine. I don't think there's too much of a problem there. Melee Splash got a bit changed. I'm going to wait and see how that actually feels personally if when I'm going to test it out. And Conk Effect got slightly nerfed on the damage front. So that's something, that sucks a little bit. And then there's a bunch of area changes over here. You can read over them. Lots of people have done analysis over this sort of stuff that you can go over. I'm not really going to bother. I don't mind if it's nerfed. It should still be fine and very playable. All your favorite skills, whatever. It just means that, potentially projectiles are going to be more flavor of the month right now because they're really good compared to area right now, and they're not getting nerfed at all. So, take that with a grain of salt. Maybe you want to play projectile skills a lot more now. Who knows? I think it should be fine. Now we come to the pretty massive section of items that have been changed or altered in some way, whether buffed, nerfed, all that sort of junk. But I'll go over that for just a second to go over what Zana has in store for us. So for this league, since we're getting all kinds of different league mods already, Zana's not going to be doing that anymore. She's instead going to do just a few sort of map mods. You pay some chaos, you attach a little map mod to it, like life or damage, for example, and you get a bit of quantity out of it and a bit of rarity. They're a bit bland. I don't know if they're going to be that fun or useful, to be honest. But there are a few more interesting ones, like area is inhabited by spiders. That's 6 chaos. Definitely going to have to try that out. Additional rogue exiles for 3 chaos at level 4. 2 exiles, 15 quantity. That's not too bad. Areas inhabited by blackguards for 6 chaos. That's going to be one to test. Monsters from beyond. So that's 3 chaos, and that will only be able to stack with a league stone, so not with a map mod itself. So as it says over here, you cannot stack any of these with current map mods. So if you have a Monster Life mod on there already, you can't attach a Zana Monster Life. Likewise, if you have a Beyonded map, you can't attach Beyond here. So you can't double Beyond through Zana anymore. You'll have to double Beyond through Zana plus the League Stone, or the map plus the League Stone, I believe. So you can't just straight up use the map and then Zana to get your double beyond anymore. There's no such thing as triple beyond, so don't even bother trying that. You then have areas inhabited by bandits, 6 chaos, and lastly, probably the most interesting one, at level 8, which most of us won't see, is twinned unique bosses, so 2 bosses in the map for 3 chaos and a bit of quantity. That's a really cool one, but yeah, obviously, shit. We probably won't get it because level 8. And there's a few bug fixes you can look at yourself. They're not too interesting. And of course, standard gets a passive skill reset. So I'll go over some of the uniques. There's a shitload of them. I'll try and highlight the ones that from my memory, I thought were actually pretty decent and ones to look out for. So most were buffed slightly across the board. Some were buffed substantially enough for you to take notice of. And someone did already compile a bunch of direct images of what each and every unique that was buffed looks like currently, and then it's listed change down below, and that's posted on Reddit, and I can chuck it into the comments for you guys as well. We looked through all of them, and some are pretty interesting. I do recommend you check it out yourself if you really want. I'll try and scroll through and highlight things that I think are actually pretty substantial and potentially usable in the future. So these boots here, Brown Rot Whalers, they've got a lot more energy shield than they used to have, and on top of that they have a good chunk of fizz and a good chunk of proj. So this is a really nice boot for something like ethereal knives, for example. That's definitely one to look out for future builds. Kingmaker, which is what you made through using a Soul Taker before, now has more of a Soul Taker, sort of effect where you can't run out of mana essentially, or you can keep attacking. And it's got some decent fizz damage now as well. So we're looking at something like a 450 PDPS with a bit of crit, and you can't run out of mana. So it could definitely see some use, but I think it's still one of the less powerful two-handed items out there, but it's one to keep your eye on. Brain Rattler gains some penetration for your lightning damage, something you could probably use. Coruscating Elixir is one that's very interesting. It now has 100% increased duration. So it's essentially a prevention to dying from chaos damage while on low life in a flask. So it's a shavs in a flask essentially, and it currently lasts 4 seconds. With buffs it's like 4.8. So now it lasts 10 seconds without any additional duration. So you can get it up to like, let's say 15 seconds if you're a Pathfinder, maybe more like 14. And 2 uses. As a Pathfinder, you should be able to sustain this thing 100% of the time. So you should be able to use this and chest of your choice, let's say a 900 ES Regalia, and not need a shavs anymore. And not only that, but you're then bypassing the cost of needing a shavs. So I'd like to test this out myself, and I think it should be a pretty good item to use to circumnavigate the need for shavs in your low life builds. So that's a really nice buff to have all that additional duration for the sustain of it. You probably wouldn't trust it on hardcore still, but it is certainly something you might want to look into on softcore. Piscators here got a slight buff with 5% elemental penetration, so it certainly could be used, especially in early league, for some early wanders, but I don't know if you'll have the single target that you want without shitloads of gear. So wanders I'd still be a bit wary of. Belt of the Deceiver is a pretty good buff here. It no longer has any real downsides, and it's just a really nice belt, especially for this level and on hardcore even. It has quite a lot of good damage properties, or damage reduction properties there, and also has property of nearby enemies are intimidated, which means they take 10% increased damage as well. So that's pretty substantial stuff there. Definitely something you can use. Drill Neck got absolutely shit on. It went from 100% projectile damage if you have 100% PS to 50% proj damage. So chances are you'll almost never be using this in a build anymore. It was really good for double dipping purposes, thanks to proj damage. Nowadays it's it's going to be pretty hard to justify over a really good quiver, especially for elemental builds. Nycta's Lantern over here is a really nice leveling weapon now, because a lot of its bullshit got removed, and it now has +2 to level of socketed fire gems, a bunch of fire damage as well, and it's just a really nice leveling weapon for, let's say, a Flame Blast build. So look out for this one for level 40. You definitely probably want to shove some fire gems into this thing and level with it as a really cheap just alternative to having to socket your shit in 5-link and whatnot. Dietus got a pretty huge buff on its damage. Not sure it's going to make it too usable. It's still kind of iffy as to how you're going to use it, but it's something to actually look at these days and potentially theory craft around. Career Ward at level 5 now has 30% increased proj damage as well, making it a very premier leveling amulet for most of the game for any proj build, so you definitely keep that on for quite a few levels. Fidelitas Spike got a nice little buff. It was already really good for elemental builds to level with, especially Spectral Throw. Now it's even better thanks to more shock chance and 50% increased Herald of Thunder buff effect, so that becomes pretty strong, I think. Hrimnor's is a decent leveling helm because it now has life. It's now got cannot be frozen or chilled if you've used a fire skill recently, as well as having fire damage. So if you're a flame blaster leveling with this, that becomes a really nice helm just to level with, I think. Nothing too substantial otherwise. Mjolnir got mildly buffed. It's just a bit better now, 100% increased spell damage. It's nothing too substantial. I don't know if it's going to be amazing. It's probably just usable. Its single target is still kind of shit, which is the problem at the moment. Dream Fragment's got a pretty substantial buff. It now has the property cannot be chilled, which is very good. It now also has 30 to 40 cold resist as well, so giving you like up to 70 cold resist. And it now requires level 24. Especially for some of these mind over matter builds, you might see some use for Dream Fragments, so keep your eye on that one. Karui Charge got, increased attack speed mod reduced, so that's a bit of a nerf. This got 2% life regen for 400 strength or more. I'm not sure you're still going to use that for Righteous Fire. I'm not an expert, but it seems kind of lackluster. Magnate, definitely something to look at now that it has 20 to 25 all elemental resistances at 200 strength. Probably just a leveling belt, but some people use this for the flask charges gained permanently. Oxium got a pretty big buff in the energy shield category, and as well as that, its general attack leech. It definitely should see some use these days, but now that it's a crystal belt, it's going to be a lot harder to find, and it's a lot rarer, I think. Victaria's influence is pretty nuts for aura builds at this stage, especially if you want to go low life with a coruscating elixir. This thing has become pretty monstrous with its new mods. I'll let you go over that yourself. Aura builds and aura bots are already nuts, and this only amplifies the issue, I think. The Covenant here seems to be a pretty damn good chest these days, because it no longer has blood magic. Now its socketed gems have blood magic. Now that's not the blood magic gem either. There won't be an increased mana multiplier there, which is really quite nice for the blood magic mod. And it no longer has reduced life, it now has 10% increased max life. So add on to the fact that it's got level 15 added chaos, which is substantially shitter than a level 20, but it is still a bunch of free damage otherwise. You could potentially have, an 8 link here, or just a way to ignore mana costs, and it's a pretty decent hybrid chest at this point too. Look, besides that, there's still like a fucking 1,000 uniques to go through. From memory of what I could remember, Comb's Roots now go up to 200 life and cannot be slowed below base speed. So these are insane. I'm probably going to use them in a lot of builds, I think. Ones that can fit Comb's Roots in, for sure. That's a huge amount of life, and it's very worth doing. This helm here now has some 10 to 20 added fizz damage. Really good for Facebreaker leveling. Look out for that one. We'll scroll through real quick and see if we can find some other shit. Terminus Est got a huge buff in its damage and crit. This should definitely see some use for Flicker Strike builds and also just general sword builds, some Cyclone maybe, that sort of shit. Assassins, all that sort of garbage. Seems like a really nice item at this point, and I may even make a build around it pretty early on. We'll go through some other things. Pyre got absolutely shit on. It now only has 40% conversion, so you'll have to use 2 of them to get 80% conversion, whereas before you'd have to use 1 for 100%. Yeah, if you use 1 of them plus a cold to fire gem, you could still get by, but it's nowhere near as good as it used to be. So that's something to, potentially cry about. Shaper's Touch, slight buff, no one really cares. Not too much happened there. There was some other shit I needed to mention. Diadian Dawn got a buff. Still kind of tough to use, chilled enemies and all that, and burn. I don't know, it's neither here nor there. I wouldn't worry too much about it. That's all garbage. I do remember Reach of the Council, for example, got absolutely dumpstered. Cherubim's Maleficence over here. Maleficence? Maleficence. Nailed it. That's got a pretty substantial buff. It now has increased chaos damage mod to 50 to 80%. It is currently a pretty nice chest. It's got a lot of life, it's got the leech rate, it's got some armor and evasion. It's pretty nice to use. Now that it has 80% chaos damage, I expect this to see a lot more use in chaos damage builds, because that is is a substantial amount of additional double dipping. So I potentially will be using some of this shit in some of my builds, wherever I can fit it in, I think. Dream Feather got a little buff for damage, so Dream Feather builds, top notch. Get onto some of those for the next league. And Maralene's Fallacy, that one lost its crit damage, non-crit less multiplier. So your non-crits used to deal 40% less damage, now they don't. It's not too substantial, it's still more or less going to be the same as what it used to be, because you're only relying on the crit damage anyway. But it's definitely one to look into for an assassin that can overcap its crit, so keep your eye on that one too. Thunder Fists used to be 1 to 100 lightning damage to attacks. They got nerfed to 1 to 40. It's now back to 1 to 100, so hey, we all make mistakes. They're really good for Elemental Wanders, where you put your 4-link Kinetic Blast in your Thunder Fists with the added lightning damage, and your 6-link in your 6-link Barrage in your chest. So that's definitely a pretty nice buff there. And you know what? Let's just talk about... There's too much shit. Oh, actually, no, that was an interesting one. Edge of Madness, that got a buff. This could definitely see some use. As a leveling weapon, it's still really good, but at level 90 or so, it'll have a pretty substantial amount of extra physical damage. It could be a really nice chaos damage sort of poison scaling weapon for your assassins or raiders or whatnot, for Cyclone, for example. That's one to keep your eye on. It could be really substantial in the future, and definitely one to look out for. This guy over here, Reach of the Council, got completely dumpstered. Used to have 4 arrows, used to have a lot more fizz damage. The fizz damage got nerfed, and now the arrows went down to 2 instead of 4. So it's essentially just a bad Death's Opus now. I could understand the nerf if you also removed Death's Opus, then it's still got its own sort of niche for additional arrows and all that. But currently, Death's Opus exists, and it's just a strictly better version than this bow now. So Reach of the Council has a little bit more fizz damage, while Death's Opus has a lot more crit and a huge amount more crit multi. So this bow, it's weird that it still exists in the game in its current state of this nerf, I'd say, because there's really no reason to farm the Council for this, I don't think. It's kind of weird that they made that change. I could understand if they took it down to 3 arrows, for example. Then it still has its niche. And there's a lot more stuff to go through. Like I said, took us 4 hours to get through on stream today. I think I've covered pretty much everything I want to as far as most items are concerned. I will let you guys look through it yourself if you want, and I'll link this for you guys. But that's pretty much it for me for the changes for 2.6. I will very hopefully have a starter build for Legacy League video happening maybe tomorrow, or at least definitely before the start of the league is a goal of mine. I just have to figure out a few more starter builds, what I could possibly recommend. Now the builds I'm going to try and recommend aren't going to be your cookie cutter, easiest possible 1 to 60. They are going to be builds that maybe scale into endgame a bit better, might be a bit slower otherwise, but hopefully viable for just about everything. That's what I'm trying for the starter builds, and that's what I'll be trying to post hopefully tomorrow. So I hope you guys are still awake throughout this conversation. Hope you got something out of it. If you watched it, if you didn't, more power to you, that's fine. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.